Since the dawning of days, we've been listening to and telling stories, and they're embedded in the way we communicate. As a result, stories stick. It's easier for us to relate to the moral of the story, to the center of the story, than it is for us to read a bunch of information. So anytime we can use stories, it comes with part of that learning and memory that we grew up with. So it taps into a buyer behavior. As I've said, stories stick. We remember them. We pass them along. And using them in marketing is just good business. You'll see, if you watch a lot of ads, you'll see that there's more and more and more stories. Even if it's a little vignette, not necessarily a full-blown story like the Jabari Parker, but something that's just a small kernel of a story inside of a piece, a marketing piece. You have more of a tendency to remember it. And part of it is because we believe stories more than we believe statistics, and it usually, a lot of these stories, the ones that we really like, are real life. That we can relate to them. We know the story, or it's happened to somebody we know, and we're more likely to pass it along. I think an interesting piece of information that comes out of all of the research is that this is how we think. We actually don't think in numbers and words. We think in terms of stories. That's how our brains are set up. And again, it starts back from when we're very young and how we learn and how we form memories. And you can consider that today a lot of product information is actually covered, and it travels inside of these stories. So it's very important to get your story out there. I think one of the important things that he states in this chapter is that along the way, while we pass along the story, we're passing a lot of really vital marketing information along to other people in the guise of a story. So sometimes we don't even know we're being brand agents for the companies we talk about. And a good story needs to have an introduction, and then it has to have an up and a down and an up and a down, and it needs to follow a very specific style in order to hold and then keep our attention. And a lot of times good stories will have morals to them, something that's either practical or entertaining or different, and that goes back to that whole concept of practicality. It goes back to what we pass along, right? We pass along useful information, we pass along we pass along the types of things that we don't expect people will know. So one of the really important concepts that he talks about in the chapter is that somewhere along the line, whatever image or story you portray, it has to connect. It definitely has to be integral and connect to your product. And I can't show you the image that he mentioned, but he mentioned the goldenpalace.com tutu prankster on the diving board in the 2004 Olympics. And it was this guy who was dressed up in a tutu, and he had blue tights on and a white polka dot tutu, and on his chest it had goldenpalace.com 2004. And then he dove into the water. He was a prankster, dove into the water at the Olympics and disrupted the synchronized diving. The challenge was that his stunt had absolutely nothing to do with Golden Palace. So while people could remember that there was a tutu prankster who dove in at the synchronized diving, not one of them could remember what the purpose of that was. So you still have to somehow tie either your name or the story or your product, and you'll see some examples of that in a minute, directly to whatever story it is that you're trying to tell. So one of the stories that I really like that he told in this chapter is the Land's End story. So Land's End felt that they had a really rich product that they could talk about, and they really weren't 100% sure how to get that really useful information out to their public. So they had somebody who sent into them and said, one of my sister had this really good customer experience with your company, and I just want to share it with you. And when she shared it, it gave them an interesting way to kind of get that information out through what they considered to be an engaging story. And this woman had said, top coats look nice, but they can't stand up to the cold weather that we experience where I live, and down coats make me look like a mummy, so I just look like I'm fat. And, what I like about the Land's End product is it's really warm, and if you have an issue, they'll fix it. And she shared a story about how she had an issue many, many years after she bought her Land's End coat, And Land's End fixed it. They actually replaced the coat for her. And she was so impressed with the customer experience that she sent in and said, here's my story. And they used that story to get the information out. And what made that work, in comparison to the Golden Palace that we saw earlier, is that the useful information about Land's End and their product was built into and integral to the story that the woman told. So this is how a lot of people remember. A lot of people know about Land's End's superior customer engagement, but they know that because Land's End puts out these great stories that circle around and tell you about that. So stories allow us to embed our information directly into the story, provided it's obviously associated with our story. And you'll see that in the Jabari Parker Gatorade Recover in the next slide, the commercial. You can show how your product solves a problem that people have, and you can see that in the Land's End. A lot of times if you have some kind of moral to the story, it also is something that people are more likely to share, right? And finally, you can hide things in there like you do in a Trojan horse. And I think the beauty of stories, or one of the things I like about stories, and he does a lot of it in his book, is that we don't realize at the moment we're watching the story that isn't what this is about. It's really about a product or a company, because we're so tied up and so enjoying the story itself. So here are some really well done stories that tie directly to the product and are integral to the product. My personal favorite is Jabari Parker. So Jabari Parker is a fairly well-known basketball phenom, and he had a very serious injury. I think he ruptured his ACL, very serious, and Gatorade connected with him during his recovery and provided him with a product called Gatorade Recovery, which is supposed to help improve your recovery time. And they filmed from the time he got hurt all the way straight through to when he came back to his to his wonderful recovery and return to professional basketball. And so this commercial chronicles that, and you can see that in this case the Gatorade is central, central to the story, but you feel like you're watching a story and not watching a commercial. And that's really the benefit of this type of marketing. The second one is a para-athlete out of Canada, and it's called Unstoppable, and it's done in reverse time. It's very well done. It hides the information in there, and I think it's something that you should take a look at. And then the third one is an Axe commercial that's called Fallen Angels, and the story is very light, but it's very funny, it's very humorous, and so I think you should also try and watch that one. But if you only get to watch one, watch the Jabari Parker one. Even as you read this book, there were things that you remembered in this book, and most of them were probably stories, right? The blender, the black toilet paper, Ken's corn shucking video, the $120 cheesesteak. Do you remember all of the statistics? Probably not. You probably don't remember all of the statistics. And the reason you don't remember the statistics is because statistics don't stick the way stories do. If you embed the statistics inside of a story and it's germane to what the center of the story is, we will remember those statistics and take them away. What you do take away is you take away the kernel, the core of that story, and you remember it, and candidly, you're more apt to pass along a story than anything else.